What's up, guys? We're back with part 3 of our series, doing a little bit of backstory as far as how my political views have changed over the last, decade or so since I became politically aware. If you haven't seen the first 2 parts, go check those out. The first one kind of covers up to 2016 election. Second one, 2016 to 2022 or so. And where we left off was sort of my the time in which I was essentially separating from and leaving the left. And, as I talked about in the previous video, that pretty much was a process that COVID and the 2020 Democratic primary, those were kind of the two last straw events for me as far as identifying myself with any segment of the left. And so at this point, I was kind of politically homeless and really exploring the ideas and concepts in libertarian theory. And I was kind of like a middle of the road libertarian, as in, well, libertarian is not left and it's not right, it's this third thing. And over the next couple years, from like 2022 and through 2024, let's say, I kind of stopped thinking of it that way over those years. And the reason really comes down to understanding what defines left and right wing. And this is kind of a question that I ask people sometimes, and I don't really get many clear answers that are not just like, whatever my side is good, and whatever side is not my side is bad. Because that's a lot of the time when you, like, for instance, if you ask a leftist, what defines left wing and right wing? They'll say, well, left wing means you care for people and you have empathy, and right wing means that you're evil and you support corporations and the rich and whatever. So, like, that's like a very sort of low-level conception of what defines these two sides of the political spectrum. And, a lot of right-wingers would give you a similarly uninteresting idea of what defines the two, sides of that spectrum. As far as what I would consider as ways to distinguish between left and right, especially in American politics, not as much, I don't know, sort of a historic take, but mostly just to deal with the here, the now, U.S. politics. The way that I would broadly define left and right is probably, I would say that you can kind of attach different outlooks on what is true and what is natural and what is the correct way to order a society. And so, like, for instance, I would define left-wing thought as being very very aligned with ideas like egalitarianism and blank slateism and these kind of like lofty terms such as equality and equity and inclusion. And on the other side of that coin, I would define right-wing political thought as something more like hierarchical, or hierarchy is how things are ordered. One of the political commentators that I like often brings up this example as a very easy way to tell if somebody is left or right wing. And you just ask the person, do you believe that some people are better than other people? And if they say yes, that's a right-wing belief. If you say no, or you start sort of making up all these sort of equivocations and you start listing all these qualifiers, that's a sign that you're probably much more left-wing. I would say that the right wing, in my opinion, rightly acknowledges that people are not always the same. And actually, nobody is the same. They're all different. They all have advantages and disadvantages if you compare them to other people. They all work more hard or less hard. They all have different values. They have different morals. They have different concepts of what is good and bad, evil and, right. And so that's like a really easy way to distinguish between the two camps of thought is, do you think some people are better than others? Another sort of thing that I think broadly applies and is a good way to sort of separate these two ideological camps is that left-wing people typically tend to have their locus of what they're concerned with is much more universal. Left-wingers are often worried about world hunger and the Earth's, ecosystem, like the whole Earth, and how are we going to save the planet, and how are we going to make a colorblind society, and how are we going to make equality, reign supreme globally. And I would say that right-wingers, on the other hand, are often much more concerned with, it's like concentric circles of priority. It's like most of their concern is with their immediate family, their nuclear family, their children, their wives, then their close friend group and their less immediate family, and then their locality, what town they're in, which, their social institution in their town, all that sort of stuff is sort of where they're focused on, what they desire to affect change in. And so I would say those are kind of some distinguishing features of left-wing thought and right-wing thought. And these kind of, they inform other beliefs within those ideological camps. That's why, left-wingers will tend to support, big policy changes that are meant to, provide a big social safety net. That's what socialism is like, we're going to use this centralized government apparatus to make everyone's at least opportunities, but in many cases outcomes, more equal. We are going to tax the wealthy to help the poor. We are going to, those sorts of ideas are very aligned with egalitarianism and very aligned with universalism. Whereas, right-wingers often, when it comes to the universality versus locality sort of preference in priority, if you ask a right-winger, are you for your nation, or, are you worried about global problems, they'll say nation. If you say state versus country, they'll say state. If you say county versus state, they'll say county. If you say the family down the street versus your family, they'll say my family. And so those sort of different focuses on priorities tend to make right-wingers support less government intervention, especially at the federal level, and especially, legislation that's going to harm their family, even if there's some argument that, oh, well, this is for the greater good or whatever. So to me, those are like the two really obvious sort of distinguishing features of the left-right political divide in America, ideologically. Doesn't always play that way in Democrat versus Republican politics. And so while I was sort of in the midst of exploring libertarianism and coming to understand what it, what that means, what kind of society can or cannot support a libertarian society, I kept running into these sort of roadblocks that made me rethink whether or not libertarianism was really its own thing that was separate from left and right. And those roadblocks were essentially that, well, if you're going to have, an ideal libertarian politic, then there's going to be essentially zero government involvement, zero government safety net. There are going to be no policies that aim to equalize opportunity or outcome. And so what I really came to understand eventually, despite a lot of resistance from my leftist priors, was that a libertarian society is only possible in the most hierarchical of terms. There is no equalizing force that is going to redistribute or, any of that stuff. And you can make an argument that, there are forces outside of government that can serve those functions, and I would say those would be preferable. But the thing about those is that they will much more likely, before the big federal government and Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare and all these social safety nets were created, it's not like charity and taking care of the less fortunate didn't exist in society at all. That's like just blatantly untrue. But much more commonly, what was happening was that your local church was running the charity locally. They were helping the homeless. They were clothing and feeding people who couldn't afford things. And, in this very secular world and country that we live in now, or at least it has been for a lot of my life, I think some of that is changing. But that's always been looked at with like this, well, just like secular perspective, that religion is kind of dated and backwards and non-scientific, and so you can kind of discard it entirely. And I think that in some ways there's truth to that analysis, but in many ways I think that the world is not as secular as a lot of these scientific atheist people believe. Even within their own thought school, I don't think that it's that way, really. I think that they just prefer different entities to worship, really. And I think we saw a lot of that with the COVID years, like trust the science and sort of deifying this capital T, capital S, the science, deifying or like sanctifying, like making Dr. Fauci a saint in their religion. And even more largely after COVID, I think something that I realized is like the religion of the left in this country is not atheism. There is no atheism with leftists that say that they're atheists. They do believe in a religion, and that religion is really the progressivist worldview, the post-Civil Rights Act mythos of American culture that has been created, which revolves around its core tenets of egalitarianism and, I find that to be very obviously, once you've kind of deconstructed this whole thing and looked past it, I just see that as very obviously a religion unto itself, complete with its own set of saints and its own set of heretics too. So anyway, that's kind of a long-winded way to be talking about it, but those are kind of some of the impasses that I encountered while trying to kind of like reconcile my old worldview with this new one that included like these libertarian thoughts and this framework that's contained within that. I think one of the other things that with libertarianism that and in my opinion being truly right-wing is being buying into differences between people and understanding that as a reality, like just a natural reality. Like different people have different abilities and talents and interests and goals and cultures and ideas and belief systems and all of that. They're all different. And, like this sort of idea that, like in its least radical form, left-wingers believe that, what we want to use the government in order to do is to create equality of opportunity. And in their more radical view, like in communist thought, they want to create equality of outcome, as in each person receives the same amount, no matter what they do for work or how hard they work or any of that. And I mean, to be honest, like, I find communist ideology so unconvincing and so kind of stupid and unnatural and obviously incorrect that right now I'm not even really going to go into it, but I'm sure eventually I'll do an episode or a bunch of episodes sort of talking about that that ideology, and because I think it is gaining popularity, whether people identify it as such or not, especially with young people. But let's just take the less radical, more mainstream, almost consensus of post-civil rights era American political thought, which is equality of opportunity. So in this framework, it's that we are supposed to use the government apparatus to create these social safety nets and create equality within opportunities, as in, that's the idea of public school is, well, instead of having all these private schools, we'll have public schools run the school system. They'll all be mandated top-down and standardized top-down by the federal government, the Department of Education. And that way, every kid in America will get the same level of opportunity for advancement in education. Well, see, the problem with that is that all different kids are of different cognitive abilities. All different kids are of different interests. All these different kids have different levels of work ethic, of cultural background, of, you name it. But they're all different. None of them are the same. And that kind of makes it hard to provide an equality of opportunity. Just the biological reality that, IQ can be measured and does exist. People biologically have different levels of cognitive ability. People's brains function different. And it's not a problem of upbringing necessarily, not in all cases. Most of the time, these are biological differences. And even if say you somehow equalized for, totally achieved equality of opportunity within schooling somehow, well, some kids are born different heights. Can you equalize opportunities for outcomes in basketball success? Some kids are faster than others. Some people are have better hand-eye coordination. There's all these innate traits that you can never achieve equality in. So even if somehow you achieve this sort of educational equality of opportunity, and then the other one is financial. And there's all these different schemes how to make this policy work. Inheritance taxes, taxing people that are wealthier, all this sort of stuff. And it's all aimed to either achieve equality of opportunity or equality of outcome. And I just think once you accept biological reality, neither one of those is achievable. And so in my process of kind of reconciling my new beliefs into my prior worldview, I just had to sort of altogether drop this egalitarianism idea as far as what was true. I don't find it convincing anymore. I don't find it, I don't know. I had to drop it at some point because it became too obvious to me that it was just like, wow, this thing that I've accepted as dogma my entire life is not a real thing. It's never been real. It's all just window dressing. And, yeah, I think that was one of the main turning points that made me accept myself as sort of not a left-winger, but also not a centrist. And, yeah, I think it was just, that was probably the hardest part of it to really kind of wrap my head around, because I had always looked at those sort of dogmatic principles of progressivism as truths, and I don't think that they are now. Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of what were some of the major turning points for me. I'm not a Republican. If anything, I find Republicans to be far too socialist, and find me a boomer Republican that supports abolishing Social Security. That's a socialist scheme. That is transferring. Actually, it's not even transferring money from the poor or from the rich to the poor. Social Security is transferring wealth from a less wealthy segment of the population, aka young working people, towards a more wealthy segment of the population, aka retirees that have built up assets and wealth over their lifetime. So that's like reverse socialism, but left-wing and right-wing establishment politicians would never run afoul of supporting Social Security, because it would make it very challenging for them to get votes. So I don't support almost any Republicans. I don't align myself as far as I don't have the same values as conservatives, because I just don't. What are we conserving? This country has changed too much to conserve anything. It's already gone. There is no we're going to conserve what we have now, and how's that going? It's not good. So, I'm still in a way, as far as Washington politics goes, I'm still politically homeless. But ideologically, I find myself in this camp of right-wing thought, and, aligning myself with right-wingers just because I've found that left-wing ideology is so blatantly wrong that it's barely worth talking about anymore. And that's why the fight is going to be, in my perspective, between the different factions in the right wing in the next decade or so. I think I'm going to end this series here. I'm not going to continue to talk about this too much, but I just wanted to do a couple different episodes that kind of gave my history and were a little more biographical, and just, kind of give you the perspective of where I'm at now and where I'm coming from and how I look at these different sort of things. If I were to define myself in the most broad terms, I guess I would call myself, I would like to be a libertarian. I do not find myself surrounded by people that believe in the same thing as I do as far as ideals, and so I acknowledge that I will not likely ever get to live in a libertarian society. And I think so. I am somewhat politically homeless, and that's okay. But I have to sort of pick and choose not the best of two evils, although in many cases it is that. But I have to sort of align myself with some camp and admit when people that I largely disagree with are getting some things right and all of that, anyways, feel free to leave feedback. Feel free to tell me, as I always say, send your hate mail in the comments. That's cool. And then, I don't know, next videos, either we'll do some more topical stuff or, I don't know, dive into some economics or something. If you watch this long, though, I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.